Kang Tae-hun's hands are shaking before the glass ever hits the floor. It happens in the middle of a routine security debrief, 40 stories above Los Angeles, in an office guarded by 6 of the most loyal men his empire has ever produced. Federal agents have spent 8 years trying to build a case that sticks to him. Rival syndicates have put a bounty on his head that would buy a small building. No one, in all that time, has ever seen him panic. Not once. Until now. His chest tightens first. Then his throat closes. The air in the room turns thin, like something has been pumped out of it. His pulse slams so hard he can hear it in his own ears, louder than the traffic 40 floors below. "Don't touch me." The words rip out of him before he even decides to speak them. Every man near the door freezes mid-step. Guns stay holstered, but bodies tense like they've been ordered into war. Nobody in this room has ever heard Kang Tae-hun sound like that. Not during the ambush outside the Koreatown warehouse. Not during the trial that nearly buried his entire organization. Not even the night 3 men died defending this exact office. For 11 years, nobody has touched Tae-hun's bare skin. Not his men, not his doctors, not a single soul who works for him. The rule has never needed repeating twice, because the one time it was broken, the man responsible never worked again. His second in command, Min Jun, steps forward on pure instinct, one hand rising toward his boss's shoulder. If you've ever wondered how someone this powerful could fall apart this fast, stay with me, because what broke Kang Tae-hun 11 years ago is about to change everything you think you know about him. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And also like, subscribe, and share as we move deeper to the story. Min Jun's hand stops in midair, because the one person in the room who hasn't flinched isn't him. She's sitting near the window, and she doesn't look like anyone the court would normally send into a room like this. She is a heavy-set black woman in a plain gray blazer, her hair pulled into a low, neat bun, a worn leather notebook resting quietly on her knee. Nobody would look twice at her on the street, but right now, she is the only calm thing in a room built entirely out of danger. Dr. Eleanor Brooks stands slowly. She doesn't rush toward Tae-hun. She doesn't call out his name like the others do. She lowers herself to the floor instead, cross-legged, 10 feet away from him, like she has all the time in the world. Everyone step back, now. Her voice doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. Min Jun hesitates, jaw tight. He could hurt himself. "He won't," she says. "Not if you give him room to breathe." Tae-hun's eyes lock onto her through the panic clawing at his vision. Something about her doesn't match the pattern. Every person who has ever tried to calm him down has reached for him, a hand on the shoulder, fingers on his arm, someone trying to physically hold his fear in place. Every one of them ended up broken, or worse. This woman hasn't moved an inch closer. She just breathes, slow, visible, deliberate. Near the door, one of the company lawyers whispers something about liability, about a sedative, about ending the session before this becomes a headline. Min Jun doesn't like that idea either. The last time someone sedated Tae-hun without warning, it took 4 men to hold him down, and one of them never fully recovered the use of his hand. Eleanor doesn't ask anyone's permission. She keeps breathing, steady, patient, and waits. Nobody in the room understands what she's doing. To them, it looks like nothing at all. No orders, no needle, no restraint. But she isn't looking at a dangerous man losing control. She's watching something underneath the danger, something that flinches the way survivors flinch, not the way killers do. Minutes crawl by. Tae-hun's chest still heaves, but slower now. His fingers, curled white around the edge of his desk, begin to loosen. The tunnel closing around his vision widens, inch by inch. He becomes aware of the room again, the hum of the air conditioning, the creak of Min Jun shifting his weight, the low, even rhythm of Eleanor's breath filling the silence like something solid he can finally hold on to. Nobody sedated him. Nobody touched him. Nobody forced his fear into submission. For the first time in longer than he can remember, His own body found its way back on its own. Tae-hun finally lifts his head and looks at her directly. Most people who meet him study his reputation first: the tailored suit, the gloves he never removes, the six-armed men who move whenever he shifts in his chair. Eleanor hasn't studied any of that. She has been watching his shoulders drop, his jaw unclench, the rhythm of breath returning to something human. "Who are you?" he says. It isn't really a question. His voice comes out rough, stripped down by the scream that tore through him minutes earlier. "Dr. Eleanor Brooks," she says simply. "Court appointed. I was assigned to your evaluation. You should be terrified right now." "I'm not." He studies her for a long moment, the way he studies men before deciding whether they live or die. The lawyers have gone quiet. Minjun still hovers near the door, unconvinced the danger has fully passed. Tae-hun barely notices any of them. His entire focus has narrowed to the one person in 11 years who didn't reach for him, didn't recoil from him, didn't treat him like a bomb they were waiting to watch explode. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he finally asks. Eleanor holds his gaze without blinking. "Because fear isn't what I see when I look at you." Tae-hun stops breathing. No one has ever answered him that way. Not his men, not his lawyers, not the woman he once believed he would marry, the one whose name still turns his stomach to stone 11 years later. Every person who has ever looked at Kang Tae-hyun has seen a myth, a warning, a man built out of money and blood and silence. For 11 years, he believed no one would ever get close enough to touch him again. He had no idea the woman sitting 10 feet away had already crossed the hardest distance of all. Tae-hyun's glove is halfway off before he notices his own hand moving. He stops, stares at his bare fingers, exposed to the office air for the first time in longer than he can remember. Eleanor doesn't react. She doesn't lean forward. She doesn't say a word about it. She just watches him notice it himself, the way a person notices they've been holding their breath. He pulls the glove back on. Neither of them mentions it. 3 weeks have passed since the panic attack in his office. 3 weeks of sessions that started as court-mandated obligation and slowly became something Tae-hyun doesn't fully understand yet. He still doesn't trust her. Trust isn't something he does anymore, but he keeps showing up. "You looked at the door twice before you sat down today," Eleanor says. He doesn't answer right away. Eleanor doesn't push. She lets the silence stretch until it becomes its own kind of question, one he can choose to answer or not. "Old habit," he finally says. "Count the exits before you count the risks. Where did you learn that?" He almost tells her it doesn't matter. Instead, something in him gives an inch. "My father taught me before I turned 12. He ran shipping routes out of Incheon before we came here. He wanted me to survive people like him." Eleanor doesn't write anything down. She never does during moments like this. She simply listens with her whole body, the way most people only pretend to. Tae-hyun tells her, slowly, in pieces that never come out in order, about the empire he built from nothing after his father died. About the years spent clawing his way from a 19-year-old running numbers on Western Avenue to the man who now controls half the ports on the West Coast. He doesn't romanticize it. He doesn't need to. The facts alone are enough to make most people afraid of him. What he doesn't expect is how much lighter it feels to say it out loud. He tells her about the foundation. Nobody outside a small circle of lawyers knows it exists. Scholarships for kids in Koreatown who can't afford college. Anonymous checks that keep a veteran's shelter in Long Beach running every winter. He funds it all through shell companies with names that mean nothing, because the money has to look clean before it can do any good. "Why keep it secret?" Eleanor asks. "Because the day people find out a monster is paying for scholarships, the scholarships stop mattering. They just become proof the monster is clever." Eleanor studies him for a long moment. "You don't think you deserve credit for it?" He doesn't answer that one at all. The session that changes everything happens on a Thursday, when Tae-hyun mentions a name he hasn't said out loud in 11 years. Min-seo. Eleanor stays perfectly still. She has learned by now that his stillness before a memory means something important is coming, and that the worst thing she could do is chase it. He tells her about the woman he was going to marry, how she studied criminal psychology at a university in Boston, how she used to say she understood the difference between men who chose violence and men who inherited it, how, for almost 4 years, she was the only place in his life that felt like peace instead of war. He tells her about the night of their engagement dinner, the private room at a restaurant overlooking the harbor, the toast he raised to a future he actually believed in. He doesn't describe what happened after the poison hit his glass. He doesn't need to. What he describes instead is her face. She smiled at me, he says, right before everything went dark. Not scared, not sorry. She smiled like she'd been waiting years to see me like that. Eleanor's chest tightens, but she doesn't let it show. This is the moment, not the violence that came after, not the burns or the broken bones or however he survived a betrayal that size. The smile. That's the wound underneath the wound. That's when touch became dangerous, Eleanor says quietly. Not a question, an understanding. Taehyun nods once. It's the closest he's come to crying in front of another human being in over a decade. That night, in an apartment across the city, a man in a parked black SUV lifts a camera with a long lens and photographs Eleanor Brooks walking from her car to her front door. He doesn't know her name yet. He only knows the address his employer gave him and the instruction that came with it. Find out who the untouchable king has been seeing twice a week and find out why he suddenly looks like a man who can be reached. The photograph is emailed within the hour to a number with no name attached. Eleanor has no idea she's being watched. Taehyun has no idea either. He's too busy, for the first time in years, sleeping through an entire night without waking up in a cold sweat. Would betrayal like that make you stop trusting people forever? Or do you think somewhere down the line, you'd try again? I'd really love to know what you'd do in the comments. 2 days later, Taehyun's second-in-command, Min Jun, hears a rumor pass quietly between two men outside a restaurant in Gardena. The untouchable king is seeing a therapist. Twice a week. Same building. Same time. Min Jun doesn't know if it's true. But rumors like that don't stay rumors for long in their world. Some men will see it as weakness, an opening to strike a boss who has finally let his guard down. Others will see it as something far more valuable a way in, a person Taehyun might actually protect over himself. Minjun says nothing to his boss. Not yet. He wants to know who started the rumor first. Taehyun, meanwhile, leaves his session early that Friday, standing abruptly mid-sentence and walking out without explanation. Eleanor watches him go, unsettled by the sudden shift, unsure whether it's progress or retreat. She doesn't chase him either. She has learned that much, at least. What she doesn't know is that Taehyun left because his phone buzzed with 3 words from Minjun. We need to talk. She finishes her paperwork alone that evening, locks her office, and drives home through the kind of Los Angeles traffic that makes every trip feel twice as long. She doesn't notice the black SUV 2 cars behind her. She doesn't notice it again outside her apartment building, idling at the curb with its headlights off. She climbs the stairs to her 3rd-floor unit, keys already in hand, tired in the particular way that comes from holding someone else's pain for an hour without setting down her own. She unlocks the door. The lights are already on. She stops in the doorway, keys still in her hand, heart suddenly loud in her ears. She never leaves the lights on. Not once, not ever, not in 6 years of living alone in this apartment. Someone has been inside. And from the silence pressing against the open doorway, she understands, with a certainty that turns her blood to ice, that someone might still be there. The glove is sitting in the middle of Eleanor's kitchen table when Taehyun walks through her door 40 minutes later. Black leather, custom stitched, the kind only a handful of tailors in the country know how to make. Taehyun recognizes it instantly because it's identical to the one sitting in his own closet and because whoever left it there wanted him to recognize it instantly. Nothing else in the apartment has been touched. No drawers pulled open, no valuables missing. Just one glove, placed deliberately in the center of the table like a signature. They weren't here for you, Taehyun says. His voice comes out flat, controlled, the voice he uses right before he makes a decision someone else won't survive. They were here to tell me they know. Eleanor stands near the window, arms crossed, still shaken, but refusing to let it show more than necessary. Know what? I see that you matter to me. He says it simply, without softness, like a man stating a fact he wishes wasn't true. Eleanor doesn't respond right away. 6 men in dark suits are already stationed outside her building by the time she finishes processing what he means. She tells him she doesn't want protection. She won't have innocent men putting their lives on the line because of her job. Taehyun listens to her argument all the way through, nods once, and then quietly assigns 2 men to watch her building anyway from a car half a block down where she'll never see them. Their sessions shift after that night, less clinical, more honest. Eleanor still keeps her boundaries, still reminds herself every morning that this is a professional relationship with a dangerous man who needs her steady more than he needs her close. But something has cracked open between them that neither one can fully seal back shut. Why psychology? He asked her one afternoon. The first time in weeks of sessions he's asked her a personal question instead of the other way around. Eleanor considers deflecting. She doesn't. My father was a firefighter. Watched him come home for years, smiling during the day, screaming in his sleep at night. Nobody had a word for what was happening to him back then. He didn't survive it. Taehyun doesn't offer sympathy. He offers something more useful. Silence, the same kind she's given him for weeks, held with the same patience. People used to assume I wasn't smart, she adds, quieter now, surprising herself with how easily it comes out. Assumed I was the receptionist. Assumed a woman my size couldn't possibly be the one they came to see. I stopped correcting people a long time ago. Something shifts behind Taehyun's eyes. Not pity. Eleanor watches carefully enough to know the difference, and what she sees isn't pity at all. It's anger, quiet and controlled, the same anger he probably feels right before he ends someone's career in his world. I've met beautiful people, he says. Very few have ever made a room feel safe. Eleanor doesn't have an answer for that. For the first time since they met, the silence between them isn't clinical. It's something else entirely, something neither of them names out loud, because naming it would make it real, and real is dangerous for both of them right now. The next morning, Minjun finds Taehyun before their usual briefing, his face tighter than usual. Someone's been feeding information, Minjun says. Session times, locations, somebody close to us. Taehyun's jaw sets. How close? Close enough to know her schedule better than I do. The empire that has run on absolute loyalty for over a decade suddenly feels riddled with question marks. Every driver, every guard, every man who has ever stood near Taehyun with a gun on his hip becomes a possibility. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone in the organization starts watching each other a little differently. Taehyun spends that night going through years of financial records, comparing timestamps, cross-referencing who had access to his calendar and when. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, a pattern starts to form, one that makes his stomach turn colder than the betrayal 11 years ago ever did, because this time the danger isn't pointed at him. The assassination attempts, the ones everyone assumed had stopped after his last close call, never actually stopped. They simply stopped aiming at him. Eleanor was never an accident. She was never collateral. Somewhere along the way, without either of them noticing exactly when, she became the target herself, because taking her from him would hurt him more than any bullet ever could. Taehyun is out the door before the sun comes up, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharper than Minjun has heard it in years. Get every man to her building, now. He arrives at her office building 11 minutes later, faster than the drive should have allowed. Eleanor is standing near the front entrance, coffee in hand, mid-sentence with a colleague, completely unaware of what's rushing toward her. Taehyun sees the red dot before she does, a thin, silent line of light resting against the side of her neck, drifting slightly with the wind. He's running before he even finishes the thought. Eleanor! She turns toward the sound of her name, confusion crossing her face at the sight of him sprinting across the plaza toward her. And in that same half-second, the front window of the building behind her shatters into 1,000 pieces of falling glass. She falls. Tae-hyun reaches her a heartbeat too late, dropping to his knees beside her on the concrete, his bare hands, both gloves gone, torn off somewhere between the car and this exact moment pressed against her, without a single thought of 11 years of rules, without a flicker of panic, without anything in his mind except her name and the blood he cannot yet tell is hers or someone else's. Tae-hyun is on his knees in broken glass, screaming a name the paramedics don't recognize. Eleanor. Eleanor, look at me. Stay with me. His hands, bare for the first time in public in 11 years, press against the side of her head where blood is already soaking into her dark hair. He doesn't feel the glass cutting into his own knees. He doesn't feel anything except the terror clawing through his chest, worse than any panic attack he's ever had in that office, worse than anything he felt the night his own body was on fire. The bullet missed her, by inches, according to the paramedic who arrives first, kneeling beside her and cutting away the sleeve of her blazer. It shattered the window above her head instead, and the force of the blast and the falling glass are what knocked her down, cut her scalp, and left a deep gash along her forearm where she threw it up to shield her face. She's alive. She's breathing. But Tae-hyun doesn't process any of that yet. All he sees is red on his hands and her eyes closed, and the sound of his own voice, cracked and unfamiliar, begging strangers in uniforms to save her. Sir, we need you to step back. I'm not leaving her. Min Jun has never seen his boss like this. Not during the ambush at the port. Not during the trial. Not during 11 years of running an empire built on the idea that Kang Tae-hyun feels nothing that can be used against him. Right now, on his knees on a sidewalk in downtown Los Angeles, surrounded by his own armed men, Tae-hyun looks like exactly what he spent a decade convincing the world he isn't. Afraid. The ambulance ride to Cedars-Sinai takes 11 minutes. It feels to Tae-hyun like 11 years. She wakes up 2 hours later with 14 stitches along her scalp, a bandaged forearm, and a mild concussion that will keep her hospitalized for 2 more days. When her eyes finally open, the first thing she sees is Tae-hyun sitting in a plastic chair beside her bed, still wearing a shirt stained with her blood, both gloves gone, his bare hands wrapped so tightly around each other, his knuckles have gone pale. You're still here, she says, voice rough. Where else would I be? It isn't a question. She almost smiles, then winces at the pull of the stitches. For the next 3 days, Tae-hyun barely leaves the hospital. He cancels every meeting. He ignores calls from men who have run his organization loyally for a decade. When Eleanor is finally discharged, he tells her, flatly, that their sessions are over. I'm done, he says. This isn't therapy anymore. This is a target on your back because of me. Eleanor sits up straighter than her bruised ribs probably allow. You don't get to make that decision for me. I already made it. No. You're making a trauma response and calling it a decision. Her voice doesn't rise, but it doesn't soften either. You think if you isolate yourself again, no one else gets hurt. That's the same lie that's kept you locked behind 11 years of gloves and empty rooms. It didn't protect you then. It's not protecting me now. Tae-hyun doesn't answer. He stares at the floor of her hospital room like it holds an answer he can't find anywhere else. Healing doesn't come from cutting people off, Eleanor says, quieter now. It comes from staying, even when staying is terrifying. Especially then, he listens. Really listens, in a way he hasn't let himself listen to anyone in 11 years. And 3 weeks later, sitting across from her in his office during what was supposed to be their final session, something happens that neither of them plans. Tae-hyun's chest tightens without warning. An old memory, triggered by nothing he can name, drags him under before he can stop it. His breathing collapses the same way it did the first day they met. His hands go to the edge of the desk, gripping so hard his knuckles turn white. Eleanor doesn't move toward him. She never does. She just breathes, slow and visible, the way she always has. Somewhere in the middle of it, without either of them noticing exactly when, Taehyun's right glove comes off completely. It falls to the floor beside his chair. Nobody touches him. Several minutes pass. His breathing slows. The tunnel closes back up around ordinary vision, and his bare hand is resting, open, on his own knee, and nothing has happened. No pain, no explosion of panic, just a hand, uncovered, existing quietly in a room with another person for the first time in 11 years. Eleanor notices. She says nothing. She lets him have this moment without turning it into a milestone he has to perform. 2 days later, everything changes again. Min Jun finally identifies the mole. It's a man named Daniel Voss. No, Taehyun catches himself. Checks the file again. The man's name is Marcus Whitfield, a logistics coordinator who has worked inside the organization for 6 years, who Taehyun personally promoted after Marcus's father, a longtime associate, died protecting a shipment during a rival attack years earlier. Marcus has had access to therapy schedules, security routes, everything. When Taehyun's men bring Marcus into a warehouse outside San Pedro, the room goes cold with a silence nobody dares break. Why? Taehyun asks. Just that. One word. Marcus doesn't beg. He doesn't deny it. You let my father die, he says. You sent him into that shipment knowing there was a leak. You knew, and you sent him anyway, because the cargo mattered more. Taehyun's jaw tightens. He remembers that night differently. He remembers making an impossible call with information that turned out to be wrong. Not a betrayal. A mistake that cost a man his life and has haunted Taehyun ever since. But grief doesn't care about the difference. Grief writes its own history. You almost got her killed, Taehyun says, low and dangerous. You understand that. I wanted you to feel what I felt. The men around the room wait for the order. 6 years of loyalty, revealed as 6 years of quiet, patient revenge, and every man in that warehouse expects exactly one outcome: execution. It's the only law this world has ever obeyed. Could you forgive someone who destroyed your life? I want you to be honest with yourself for a second before you keep watching. Taehyun stares at Marcus for a long, unbearable minute. He thinks of Eleanor's voice in his head, steady as always. Healing isn't measured by what your enemies deserve. It's measured by who you become. Take him to the federal building, Taehyun finally says. Let the courts decide. The room goes still with disbelief. Min Jun's eyes widen slightly, the closest thing to shock Taehyun has ever seen on his face. Nobody in this organization has ever heard Kang Taehyun choose mercy over blood. As two men lead Marcus toward the door, he stops, turning his head just enough to speak one last sentence, quiet enough that only Taehyun hears it clearly. You still haven't figured out who planned Isabella's betrayal. Taehyun freezes. Marcus is pulled through the door before Taehyun can respond, before he can ask what that sentence even means, before he can process the possibility that the worst night of his life 11 years ago wasn't the end of a story. It might have only been the beginning of one. Taehyun spends 4 straight nights going through files he hasn't opened in 11 years. Financial records, shipping manifests, old surveillance photos of Isabella that he buried in a storage unit after the fire, unable to look at her face but unable to destroy the only evidence he had of what happened. Somewhere around 3 in the morning on the 4th night, he finds something that changes everything. A wire transfer, dated 6 weeks before the engagement dinner, routed through 3 shell accounts before landing in a account tied to Isabella's name. The amount is small enough to have been overlooked by anyone not looking specifically for it. The sender is a name Taehyun doesn't recognize. A holding company registered in Delaware, the kind of company that exists purely to hide who's really behind it. Isabella wasn't the architect of his betrayal. She was a piece moved by someone else, someone patient enough to plan a con that took years, someone who understood exactly what would break Kang Taehyun without ever appearing in the room themselves. The conspiracy is bigger than one woman's smile. It always was. Taehyun doesn't chase it, not yet. For the first time in 11 years, he makes a choice that would have been unthinkable to the man he was before Eleanor sat down on his office floor. He sets the file aside. "You're not going after them," Eleanor says the next day, watching his face carefully. "Not today. Because you want to protect me, or because you're actually choosing something different." Taehyun considers the question honestly, maybe for the first time in his life. Both, he admits. Over the following months, his empire begins to shift in ways his men don't fully understand at first. Contracts tied to trafficking routes get quietly severed. Extortion operations in Koreatown and Long Beach are dismantled instead of expanded. Min Jun questions it once, carefully, and Taehyun's answer is simple. "I spent 11 years building something to protect myself from ever feeling weak again. I don't need that anymore." Eleanor, meanwhile, is fighting a quieter war of her own. For years, she carried the weight of every glance that lingered too long on her body, every assumption that her size meant something about her mind. Taehyun never once commented on how she looks. Not her weight, not her plain blazers, not anything the world has spent her whole life measuring her by. He asks about her thoughts, her instincts, the steadiness that got him through the worst afternoon of his adult life. For the first time, someone sees her before they notice anything else about her. That changes something in Eleanor that 15 years of professional confidence never quite managed to reach. The final session happens on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after the panic attack that started everything. Taehyun feels it coming before he can stop it, an old wave of fear rising in his chest without warning, familiar and unwelcome. His breathing catches. His hands grip the arms of his chair. Eleanor doesn't sit on the floor this time. She doesn't keep her distance the way she has for 6 months. She reaches her hand out toward him instead, palm open, resting quietly on the space between their chairs. She doesn't expect him to take it. She's simply offering, the way she always has, without demand. Several long seconds pass. Taehyun stares at her hand like it might be the most dangerous thing he's ever faced, more dangerous than any rival, any bullet, any enemy he's outlived in 11 years of war. Slowly, his fingers move to his glove. He pulls it off. His hand trembles as he reaches across the space between them. Eleanor stays perfectly still, letting him choose every inch of the distance. And then his bare fingertips touch hers. Nothing happens. No panic, no pain, no explosion of memory dragging him back to a night he spent 11 years trying to survive. Just warmth and stillness and a silence so complete it feels like the whole room is holding its breath alongside him. Tears fill Taehyun's eyes before he can stop them. 11 years, one simple touch, and for the first time since the night his world burned down around him, Kang Taehyun understands he isn't broken beyond repair. He understands, sitting there with her hand in his, that Eleanor never actually healed his nervous system. What she healed was something deeper. The belief that every act of closeness ends in betrayal. The belief that safety only exists in distance. She rebuilt that from nothing, one silent afternoon at a time, without ever once forcing him to hurry. Weeks later, federal investigators quietly reach out to Taehyun's legal team about a pattern they've uncovered across 5 different American cities: Chicago, Miami, Detroit, New York, and now Los Angeles, evidence suggesting a hidden organization has been manipulating rival crime families against each other for decades, profiting from every war they secretly started. Isabella's betrayal, Taehyun now understands, was never a personal act of cruelty. It was one move in a much larger game, played by people who never had to lift a weapon themselves. Taehyun thought surviving betrayal was the hardest battle of his life. He hadn't yet met the people who created it. Fade out. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, thank you. Genuinely. Stories like this only mean something when someone's actually listening on the other side. And today, that was you. If stories about healing, second chances, and finding strength in the most unexpected places speak to you, consider sticking around and subscribing so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to know what moment touched you the most in this story. Do you believe trust can really be rebuilt after betrayal that deep? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear where this story found you today. Until the next one, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.